happening today? Much happening? How are you all going? Good, Declan, good. All right, well, good morning. Jared Lee, Deputy Leader of the Opposition, joined with Shadow Health Minister Ros Bates today. Well, we're hearing reports that the Palaszczuk government will be reshuffling the cabinet. And I've just got to say that this is more chaos and crisis of the Palaszczuk government. If Anastasia Palaszczuk thinks that changing a few faces around in a reshuffle is going to save her dying government, she's got another thing coming. The reality is the clowns are still there and the circus is the same. But Queenslanders will not buy the fact that this is going to reset the government and fix the issues that matter importantly to Queensland. That's the reality. I would say also that the flashes from the cameras on the red carpet have blinded the Premier to the reality of what's happening here. This is a government that is in total chaos and crisis. This is a government that has been in power for over 8 years in Queensland, and we have seen the youth justice crime crisis, we've seen the homelessness and the housing crisis, and we have seen the health crisis. No one in this government has taken responsibility. There are no consequences by a simple reshuffle using the existing people as reported today. So as I absolutely make it abundantly clear, it's the same old circus with the same clowns. It is the same old circus with the same clowns. And the ringmaster is Anastasia Palaszczuk. She is the Premier. She has failed to show leadership in any of these matters. And in a moment, Ros Bates will talk particularly about Health Minister Yvette D'Arth. There is no consequences for any of the incompetence that we've seen in the Palaszczuk government. No one. If the reports are to be believed that we're reading and seeing today, that all is happening is 3 ministers will be shuffled into different portfolios, but no one is going to be sacked from the cabinet, then it just shows that Anastasia is putting her interests first, not the people of Queensland. I'm going to hand over to Ros Bates to make a few remarks, and I'll take some questions. Thanks, Ros.
Thanks, Jared. Ros Bates, Shadow Minister for Health and Ambulance Services and Registered Nurse. Well, it doesn't matter who Anastasia Palaszczuk puts in as the Health Minister. It's Anastasia Palaszczuk who has presided over the chaos and crisis that is Queensland Health. It's all about Anastasia Palaszczuk doing deals to secure her future, not the future of Queenslanders. We have had 8 years of a Palaszczuk Labor government, and we have had, by the sounds of it, going to have 4 health ministers. We have had Cameron Dick, we've had Stephen Miles, Yvette D'Arth, and if the rumours are true, the next health minister will be Shannon Fentiman. Queensland Health was in crisis long before COVID, and Queenslanders deserve a world-class health system no matter where they live. We have seen so many disasters in Queensland Health over the last 8 years. We have the worst ambulance ramping in the state at 41%. We have blowouts in the waiting list for the waiting list. We have blowouts of patients waiting to have their surgery. We have seen the debacles at Mackay Hospital. We're seeing the debacle of the maternity crisis at Gladstone. We're now seeing issues at both Townsville and Cairns Hospital, and all of this has been under the watch of Yvette D'Arth. This is a government that is in chaos and crisis and has no solutions to fix the Queensland health crisis. We, on the other hand, have put up our solutions, which is real-time data monitoring, better resourcing, better triaging, and putting doctors and nurses back in charge of hospitals. And if the rumours are true that Shannon Fentiman is going to be the next health minister, well, heaven help Queenslanders. Let me remind you that Shannon Fentiman was a fraud, a phony and a failure as the Child Safety Minister. She was the worst Child Safety Minister this state has ever seen. And I, along with everybody else, will never let Queenslanders forget that Shannon Fentiman was the Child Safety Minister when Mason Jet Lee and Tiali Palmer were murdered. Jared.
Thanks, Ros. Questions?
Does this come as a shock to you?
Well, we've been calling for ministers, incompetent ministers in the Palaszczuk government, to be sacked or resign from their portfolios. They've had 8 years of mess. They've had ambulance ramping increase. When Anastasia took over as Premier, ambulance ramping was at 15%. Now it's at 41% across the state. So, as I said, just changing a few faces in the circus is not going to change the reality. Anastasia Palaszczuk is the Premier. She leads this cabinet and she's not sacking anyone. Yvette D'Arth will stay there. How on earth can the Premier try and reset her government by utilising the same people in the same cabinet that are going to be sitting around the cabinet table, earning the same amount of money, sitting around with the same people and making decisions that they have been doing for the last 8 years in this government? Nothing is going to change. So it's not a surprise that the government are trying to reset because, as I said, this is all about Anastasia Palaszczuk. This government is rotten to the core. This government is in its dying days. And Anastasia Palaszczuk thinks that this little sideshoe shuffle is going to be a great reset for her party and her thinking of how she can win the next election. When Queenslanders are out there talking about cost of living, the health crisis, the youth crime crisis, the homelessness issue, the housing crisis, that's what we've got to be focused on. The Labor Party are focused internally, and it is just who gets what job for the mates, and that's all they're doing. That is absolutely all they're doing. And as I said, it's the same old clowns in the same old circus, but Queenslanders will not buy any attempt by the Palaszczuk government to try and make out that their ministers are competent and this is going to fix the issues.
In terms of voter optics, though, do you think that, I guess, everyday Queenslanders outside of Parliament, if they're saying that housing isn't working, health isn't working, youth crime, laws aren't working, if they're looking at this reshuffle and think, oh, the government's almost saying, yeah, we've got it wrong, it's time for a refresh, surely that would be enough for some Queenslanders.
Well, you've also got to look at what Anastasia Palaszczuk said about Health D'Arth when our Shadow Minister John Paul Langbrook asked in the last sitting week, is she going to reshuffle Yvette D'Arth out of Cabinet? And Anastasia Palaszczuk stood up and said, N-O. Yvette D'Arth 2 weeks ago stood in front of hundreds of people at the Cedar lunch and said she's not going anywhere. This is just the political reality of what Anastasia is trying to do. And what are they going to do? If they're not sacking any of these people, which the reports are they're not, they're just getting other jobs on the same income and same high pay, are they going to put Mark Bailey into another role? Is Mark Bailey, who has presided over budget blowout after budget blowout, is he going to be in charge of youth justice? Is Stephen Miles, who oversaw the $220 million in Wellcamp, is he going to be in charge of housing? Their talent pool is shallow. And if they're not sacking these ministers, which the reports are they're not, then no one is held accountable for the mistakes of this government. And Queenslanders, I don't think, will buy the fact that a simple reshuffle on portfolios is going to be enough to save this government or save this Premier. I think Queenslanders are smart enough to know that the Premier, the fish rots from the head, and the Premier is the leader of this government. And this government is rotten to the core. I don't accept that because in the LNP government, Lawrence Springborg was the former health minister in the LNP government, and we got ambulance ramping down. Despite Anna Bligh, in the dying days of her government, which is so reminiscent of what's happening in this Palaszczuk government, Anna Bligh was going to separate Queensland Health, saying it was an absolute basket case, she was going to break up the department. Lawrence Springborg came in, worked with the department, cooperated with the department, set the health and hospital boards up, had experts in the field on those boards, and got rid of the waiting list. The dental waiting list went down, the cochlear implant waiting list went down, and ambulance ramping went down. It is only an excuse for the Labor Party to say that health is a poison chalice because Labor Party don't handle health well in any of their health ministers. The new health minister will be the fourth health minister the Palaszczuk government have had, and the issues will not change because the culture of the government will not change. Whilst Anastasia Palaszczuk is the Premier, the culture of the government will not change. She is the ringmaster in a circus of old clowns and old circus, and nothing will change. Go there, ma'am. Well, a good compare and contrast. The Leader of the Opposition, David Crisafulli, is on his way to the Gold Coast to speak to victims of crime. And there were more break-ins overnight at the Gold Coast. So while we're talking about, as I said, the issues that matter to people, housing, the crime, that's where the Leader of the Opposition is. and the Premier is obviously focused internally on who's going to be in her reshuffle and portfolios today. Well, a good question on the backbench of the Labor Party. As I say, it's a shallow talent pool in the front bench, and it's as an equally shallow talent pool on the backbench. But the Premier, remember, she said a few months ago that no one on her backbench was going to be promoted, so it's no surprise there that she's only shuffling the clowns around in the circus. But the reality is, I feel for Queenslanders, because whoever at the end of the day, if the announcements are made today, whoever takes over health will have the former health minister, the previous health minister Miles, and the previous minister Cameron Dick, who's now the treasurer who funds Queensland Health, all sitting around the same cabinet table. So that's why I'm saying to Queenslanders, don't expect this great reset, don't expect the health system to be healed overnight by what the Premier is doing today. The Premier is only doing today because she is more interested in her job. She is blinded by the camera flashes on the red carpet to the reality of the situation here. And nothing will change under this Palaszczuk government, rotten to the core and in its dying days. Well, we are promising a far better way to do things. We've talked about, and I might get Ros to explain what we've announced in health, but in the youth justice, for example, we've said there's got to be consequences for action. We campaigned for years for breach of bail. The government finally copied us on that policy, despite sending Sterling Hinchcliffe out the day before saying how bad breach of bail was. Then they announced it. We've also said you've got to unshackle the judiciary, get rid of detention as a last resort, and then we said we need gold standard early intervention programs. So there is a better way to do things. But I think if Queenslanders won't trust the Palaszczuk government to be able to do it, if they haven't been able to do it in 8 years, then they won't be able to do it in the next year and a half before the election. Ros, can you address the health question, please?
Well, certainly the culture needs to change in Queensland Health, and we've proved previously under LNP governments that we can heal the health crisis. We need to have a minister, for a start off, who actually believes his staff, that the staff aren't frightened to actually come forward and tell what's going on. You need to make sure that patients are actually being listened to, and that's what David Christophilou and I've been doing on those 30 health tours around Queensland. We are listening to Queenslanders. I went to the PA hospital yesterday and I met with the nurses from the spinal unit. I met with the staff from the COVID clinic. I went to the ED department. You know, I went on a ride-along for a 12-hour night duty with the QAS only 4 weeks ago. They're the sort of things that a health minister should be doing, so that you've got your ear to the ground and you know what's happening, and that your staff feel confident in coming forward and speaking to you, and confident that you actually will listen and do something about it. I don't think a reshuffle in health is going to make any difference. And as I said, if Shannon Fentiman is going to be the health minister come this afternoon, heaven help Queenslanders. That woman destroyed child safety here in Queensland. She got shuffled into small business after that. Now they're shuffling her out of the Attorney General's role because she couldn't do that, and into health. Health is something that is life and death, and it's important. And you need to have someone in there who actually listens and cares, and there isn't anybody currently in that cabinet who is capable of doing that job. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Everybody,
Cheers.
have a good day.